The UK housing market has stopped. Not slowed down, not cooled off, stopped. Right now, hundreds of thousands of potential buyers are sitting on their hands, refusing to move forward with purchases. Sellers are watching their properties languish on the market for weeks longer than expected. Estate agents are reporting conversations that all end the same way. Let's wait until after the budget. But here's what most people don't understand. This isn't just pre-budget jitters. This is something far more calculated, far more deliberate, and the consequences could reshape British property ownership for a generation. What's really happening in the UK housing market isn't being reported in the headlines. The freeze you're seeing right now is just the surface. Underneath, there's a battle brewing between homeowners, the Treasury, and a government desperate for revenue. And on November 26th, everything changes. Before we dive deeper into this crisis, if you want to stay ahead of every major development in UK property and housing news, hit that like button and subscribe to Property Reporter. We're bringing you the analysis that mainstream media won't touch, the rumours Westminster doesn't want you to hear, and the data that reveals what's really going on in the British housing market. Let me show you the numbers that prove this market has frozen solid. Between now and the same period last year, buyer demand has collapsed by 8%. Sales being agreed are down 3%. That might not sound catastrophic until you realise this is the first annual decline in new sales agreements in 2 full years. The market had been recovering, mortgage rates had stabilised, and buyers were finally returning with confidence. Then the rumours started. Now, the usual Christmas slowdown that typically begins in late November has arrived 6 to 8 weeks early. Estate agents across the country are reporting the same phenomenon. Viewings are down, offers are being withdrawn, and chains are collapsing because someone in the middle has decided to wait. Wait for what exactly? Wait for the Chancellor to reveal her hand on November 26th. But here's where it gets sinister. The property market is currently sitting on the largest sales pipeline since May of 2021, when the post-pandemic property boom was at absolute fever pitch. Right now, almost 350,000 homes worth over £100 billion are stuck in limbo, working their way through the sales process. These are people who started their transactions months ago, who exchanged contracts before the panic set in, who are now trapped in a system that takes 5 to 6 months from agreement to completion. They're watching the news every day, terrified that the budget will introduce some new tax that makes their purchase more expensive overnight. Imagine being 4 months into buying your dream home, having paid for surveys and solicitors, only to wake up on November 27th and discover you now owe thousands more than you planned. The rumours swirling around Westminster aren't just gossip. They're strategic leaks, deliberate kite-flying exercises designed to test public reaction before the Chancellor commits to anything. And the proposals being floated are genuinely radical. First, there's talk of abolishing stamp duty altogether and replacing it with an annual property tax on homes valued above £500,000. Think about that for a moment. Instead of paying a one-time tax when you buy a property, you'd pay every single year you own it. The tax would supposedly escalate with property value, meaning someone with a modest home just above the threshold might pay a few £100s annually, while someone in a multi-million-pound property would face bills running into thousands. Supporters claim this would improve market mobility and spread costs fairly. Critics warn it would hammer homeowners in London and the South East, where even ordinary family homes regularly exceed £500,000. Then there's the capital gains tax proposal that has wealthy homeowners genuinely frightened. Currently, when you sell your primary residence in the UK, any profit you make is completely exempt from capital gains tax. It's one of the sacred pillars of British property ownership. Your home is your castle, and the government doesn't take a cut when you sell it. But now, rumours suggest the Chancellor is considering applying capital gains tax to primary residences valued above £1.5 million. The justification is that people who've benefited from decades of property price growth in expensive areas should contribute more to public finances. The reality is that this would disproportionately punish people in London and affluent southern regions, where property values have nothing to do with renovations or improvements and everything to do with location. Someone who bought a terraced house in Clapham 30 years ago for £80,000 could now be sitting on a £1.8 million asset through no effort of their own. Should they pay capital gains tax on that increase? The government thinks maybe they should dot. And it doesn't stop there. Reports suggest the Treasury is exploring an 8% national insurance levy on rental income. Right now, landlords pay income tax on their rental profits after deducting expenses like mortgage interest and maintenance costs. But national insurance has traditionally been exempt. If this change goes through, it would fundamentally alter the economics of being a landlord in Britain. Small-scale landlords, the people who own one or two rental properties as part of their retirement planning, would be hit hardest. Many are already operating on thin margins after recent tax changes removed their ability to fully deduct mortgage interest. Add an 8% national insurance charge on top, and a significant number will simply exit the market. They'll sell up, reduce the rental housing stock, and push remaining rents even higher. Tenants, ironically, would suffer most from a policy designed to extract more tax from landlords. But what nobody's talking about is that some of this has already happened. Back on April 1st of this year, stamp duty thresholds changed dramatically, and the market response was telling. Before that date, first-time buyers in England paid no stamp duty on properties worth up to £425,000. Overnight, that threshold dropped to £300,000. Suddenly, first-time buyers purchasing anything above £300,000 were facing thousands in additional costs. A first-time buyer purchasing a £350,000 property went from paying zero stamp duty to paying £2,500. That might not sound like much to someone comfortably established, but for a young couple scraping together a deposit, it's devastating. The government knew this was coming. They announced it months in advance. And what happened? March of 2025 saw property transactions more than double compared to the previous March. People rushed to complete purchases before the deadline, creating an artificial boom that left estate agents working around the clock and solicitors drowning in paperwork. Then April arrived, and the market fell off a cliff. Transactions collapsed, buyer demand evaporated. It was predictable, inevitable, and entirely the result of government policy creating arbitrary deadlines that distort normal market behaviour. Now, with the November budget approaching, we're seeing the same pattern repeat. Buyers who might normally transact in November or December are pulling out, waiting to see what new costs might be imposed. Sellers who need to move are stuck, unable to generate interest because everyone's too nervous to commit. The geographic split in the UK housing market has never been more pronounced. Up in the northeast, house prices have risen by more than 6% over the past year. In some local authority areas, growth has hit 8% or more. Places like Middlesbrough and North Lanarkshire are seeing genuine price appreciation as buyers discover they can get far more space and quality for their money compared to southern England. Scotland and Wales are experiencing similar patterns, with solid growth driven by affordability and buyers relocating from more expensive regions. The Northwest is booming. Manchester, Liverpool, and surrounding areas are benefiting from infrastructure investment, business growth, and a thriving rental market that makes buy-to-let properties attractive despite the regulatory challenges. But London is barely moving. Annual house price growth in the capital has been essentially flat, with some areas showing slight declines. The average London property is now worth around £296,000, but that figure masks enormous variation. Central London remains eye-wateringly expensive. propped up by international investors and wealthy buyers for whom a few £1 million is pocket change. But outer London boroughs and commuter towns are struggling. Affordability has been stretched to breaking point. Even two-income professional households are finding it nearly impossible to get on the ladder without parental help or decades of saving. And now, with rumours swirling about new property taxes specifically targeting homes above £500,000, anyone in London or the South East with a property anywhere near that threshold is understandably nervous. Here's the crucial detail that explains why properties above £500,000 are particularly affected. According to market data, about 20% of the UK property market sits above that value. But the distribution isn't even. In London, a huge proportion of family homes exceed £500,000. In the South East, particularly in commuter belts around the capital, ordinary 3- and 4-bedroom houses routinely hit or exceed that figure. Meanwhile, in the north, £500,000 buys you something genuinely impressive, perhaps even a small mansion. So when the government considers policies that use £500,000 as a threshold, they're not creating a tax on the wealthy. They're creating a tax on geography. They're punishing people whose only crime was buying a house in an area where prices rose faster than wages. The speculation around council tax reform adds another layer of uncertainty. Britain's council tax system is famously outdated, still based on property valuations from 1991. A modest terrace in an area that's since gentrified might be in Band B, paying relatively little, while a similarly sized property in a less fashionable area could be in Band D, paying significantly more. The system makes no sense. Everyone acknowledges it's broken, and successive governments have been too frightened to reform it because any change creates winners and losers. But now, reports suggest the Chancellor might introduce new council tax bands specifically for high-value properties. Homes worth over a certain amount, perhaps £1 million or more, would be placed in new premium bands with substantially higher annual charges. On paper, it sounds fair. In practice, it would disproportionately affect elderly homeowners who bought decades ago, have paid off their mortgages, and are now living on fixed incomes. Their homes might be worth a fortune on paper, but they're asset-rich and cash-poor. Forcing them to pay thousands more in council tax every year could drive them out of family homes they've occupied for generations. Landlords, meanwhile, are facing a perfect storm of challenges that goes far beyond the national insurance rumours. Over the past few years, successive policy changes have made being a landlord increasingly difficult and expensive. Mortgage interest tax relief was removed, significantly increasing tax bills for landlords with mortgages. Stamp duty surcharges were introduced, then increased, making it more expensive to purchase buy-to-let properties. The surcharge currently sits at 5% on top of standard stamp duty rates, meaning a landlord purchasing a second property worth £300,000 pays an extra £15,000 in tax compared to an owner-occupier. Energy performance certificate requirements are tightening, with landlords now required to ensure rental properties meet minimum efficiency standards or face substantial upgrade costs. Tenant protection legislation is expanding, giving renters more rights but reducing landlords' flexibility to manage their properties. The cumulative effect of all these changes is that small-scale landlords are leaving the market in droves. These aren't wealthy property moguls with vast portfolios. They're ordinary people who bought a second property as an investment, perhaps planning to fund their retirement with rental income. Now, they're finding the regulatory burden overwhelming, the tax treatment punitive, and the financial returns barely worth the hassle. When they sell up and exit the market, their properties often get purchased by owner-occupiers or by large institutional landlords with the scale and resources to manage complex compliance requirements. The result is a shrinking rental sector, higher rents due to reduced supply, and increased market dominance by corporate landlords who have far less personal connection to their tenants. What happens next depends entirely on what Rachel Reeves announces on November 26th. If she introduces aggressive property tax reforms, the market will experience another shock similar to the April stamp duty changes. Buyers will pull out of transactions. Sellers will lower asking prices. The properties stuck in the pipeline will face delays and renegotiations as buyers demand price reductions to offset unexpected tax costs. Estate agents will see their workload collapse. Solicitors will deal with a wave of aborted sales. The construction industry, which relies on a steady flow of property transactions to drive demand for renovations, extensions, and new builds, will suffer. But if the Chancellor takes a more measured approach, perhaps announcing consultations on future reforms rather than immediate changes, the market might breathe a sigh of relief and return to something approaching normal activity. Market forecasters are split on what comes next. Some predict house price growth will finish the year between 1 and 1.5%, with modest continued growth into 2026. They point to stable mortgage rates, improving affordability as wages rise faster than prices, and underlying demand that hasn't disappeared, just been suppressed by uncertainty. Others are far more pessimistic. They warn that sticky inflation could keep interest rates higher for longer than expected, that mortgage rates might not fall as quickly as hoped, and that any significant property tax increases could trigger a genuine market correction. The truth is probably somewhere in between. The UK housing market is remarkably resilient, supported by chronic undersupply, strict planning rules that limit new building, and cultural factors that make home ownership a deep-seated aspiration for most British people. But resilience doesn't mean immunity. If the government imposes substantial new costs on home ownership, particularly costs that fall unevenly across different regions and property values, they risk creating distortions that could take years to unwind. Wealthy homeowners might accelerate plans to downsize or relocate, flooding the market with high-value properties just as demand is weakest. First-time buyers could be priced out entirely, trapped renting indefinitely while watching the ladder they're trying to climb get taller. Regional inequality could deepen, with London and the southeast falling further behind northern regions where housing remains affordable. The rental market could become even more dysfunctional, with rents consuming ever larger shares of tenant incomes, while landlords struggle with rising costs and tightening regulations. Here's what's most frustrating for everyone caught in this freeze. The uncertainty itself is the problem. If the government simply announced its plans clearly, well in advance, with proper consultation and transition periods, the market could adapt. Buyers could make informed decisions. Sellers could price realistically. Agents could advise clients with confidence. Instead, we have rumour and speculation, leaked proposals and trial balloons, creating an environment where nobody knows what's coming and everyone's too scared to move. Property transactions are complex, expensive, and emotionally draining. They require commitment, trust, and a willingness to take on substantial financial obligations. When the government undermines that confidence by constantly threatening to change the rules mid-game, they damage not just the housing market, but the broader economy that depends on it. The most likely outcome from the November budget is a mixed bag. The Chancellor will probably introduce some property tax changes, but not the most radical proposals being discussed. She'll need to raise revenue to meet fiscal targets, but she also needs to avoid triggering a market collapse that would reduce transaction volumes and actually decrease tax receipts. Expect tweaks rather than transformation. Perhaps new council tax bans for very high-value properties. Maybe some adjustment to capital gains tax rules that affects second homes but leaves primary residences alone. Possibly some crackdown on tax avoidance schemes used by wealthy property owners. But wholesale abolition of stamp duty seems unlikely in the near term because it generates too much revenue and any replacement would take years to implement properly. What should buyers and sellers do right now? If you're in the middle of a transaction and genuinely need to move, pushing forward might make sense despite the uncertainty. Waiting indefinitely for perfect conditions means missing opportunities. If you're just starting to look and you're not under time pressure, waiting until after November 26th could provide valuable clarity. If you're selling, be prepared to be flexible on price. The market has shifted decisively toward buyers, with property choice at decade-high levels. Unrealistic pricing will simply result in your home sitting on the market for months, while similar properties priced more realistically get snapped up. If you're a landlord, carefully assess whether the economics still work for your situation. If margins are already tight and further tax increases are coming, selling might be the smart move before everyone else reaches the same conclusion. The bigger picture here is about Britain's relationship with property ownership. For generations, owning your home has been the foundation of middle-class wealth in this country. Property has been seen as a safe investment, a store of value, and a way to build intergenerational wealth to pass on to children. But if government policy increasingly treats home ownership as something to be taxed, regulated, and restricted rather than encouraged and supported, that cultural understanding will shift. Younger generations already priced out of home ownership might stop seeing it as an achievable goal and adjust their financial planning accordingly. International investors might look elsewhere if the UK property market becomes too expensive or complicated. Wealthy homeowners might relocate abroad, taking their money and their taxable income with them. The UK is not alone in grappling with these issues. Countries around the world are struggling to balance housing affordability, government revenue needs, and property market stability. Some have introduced annual property taxes similar to what's being discussed here. Some have wealth taxes that include residential property. Some have aggressive capital gains taxes on all property sales, including primary residences. The international evidence suggests these policies have mixed results at best. Annual property taxes can improve market mobility by reducing the one-time cost of moving, but they also create ongoing costs that burden elderly homeowners and anyone on fixed incomes. Capital gains taxes on primary residences raise revenue but discourage people from moving and can create bizarre incentives to spend money on consumption rather than invest in property improvements. Wealth taxes sound appealing, but are notoriously difficult to administer and often drive wealthy individuals to relocate to more tax-friendly jurisdictions. What's missing from the entire debate is an honest conversation about what we want the UK housing market to look like. Do we want widespread home ownership, even if that means accepting that house prices will generally rise over time? Do we want a larger, more professional rental sector, even if that means accepting that most landlords will be institutional investors rather than individual people? Do we want genuinely affordable housing, even if that requires massive building programs and reforms to planning laws that upset existing homeowners? Do we want to tax property wealth to fund public services, even if that means middle-class homeowners feel less wealthy and secure? These are genuine trade-offs with no easy answers. But making policy through leaked rumours and last-minute budget announcements without proper consultation or long-term strategy is the worst possible approach. The freeze in the UK property market right now is a symptom of deeper problems. It's a symptom of a government that desperately needs revenue but has limited options for raising it after ruling out increases to income tax, national insurance, and VAT. It's a symptom of a housing market that has become too expensive for ordinary people, but where existing homeowners resist any policy that might reduce their property's value. It's a symptom of regional inequality so extreme that houses in some parts of the country cost 10 times what similar houses cost elsewhere. It's a symptom of chronic undersupply, with planning rules so restrictive that building new homes is prohibitively difficult and expensive. It's a symptom of a rental sector squeezed between tenants who can barely afford rising rents and landlords who can barely afford rising costs and regulations. On November 26th, the Chancellor will step up to the dispatch box and reveal what she's decided. The property market will react within hours. If the changes are modest and well targeted, confidence might return relatively quickly. Buyers who've been sitting on the sidelines will re-enter the market. Sellers will adjust their expectations and accept that this is a buyer's market for now. Transactions will pick up as we head into the new year. But if the changes are aggressive and poorly designed, the freeze could deepen into something worse. Prices could fall sharply in affected areas. Transaction volumes could collapse. The sales pipeline, worth over £100 billion, could unravel as deals fall through and chains collapse. The economic ripple effects would extend far beyond the property market itself, affecting construction, home improvements, furnishings, removals, and all the other industries that depend on people buying and selling homes. So where does that leave us? The UK property market is frozen, not because of economic fundamentals, but because of political uncertainty. Buyers are waiting to see what costs they'll face. Sellers are stuck hoping their properties don't lose value before they can complete sales. Landlords are calculating whether it's worth staying in the market. Everyone is watching the government, waiting for clarity that should have been provided months ago. This isn't how a healthy property market operates. This isn't how responsible economic policy is conducted. And it's ordinary people trying to buy their first home or downsize for retirement or provide rental housing who are paying the price for this chaos. November 26th will bring answers, but the real question is whether those answers will restore confidence or deepen the crisis. The UK property market is holding its breath. In less than a month, we'll find out if it can breathe again or if it's about to suffocate under the weight of taxes it never saw coming.